They saw him as useless, unaware of the countless times he saved their life with his skill guidepost. They thought he just makes up fake monsters to scam them, but Root silently soaked up all the mockery by fellow adventurers. Until one day, he got hired by Marks, a real adventurer who finally understood his value, unlocking his max potential to guide through deadly dungeons no adventurer ever returned from. In the depths of the jungle, a group of rhinoceros-like monsters had surrounded a carriage, leaving the humans inside trembling in fear. Someone shouted that a great horn was right there. Another let out a panicked cry, and in an instant, they decided to flee. They urged the horses to run as fast as they could, abandoning all caution. One of the men glanced back, his face turning pale, and muttered that maybe they should have paid for a guide after all. It was already too late. The charging rhinoceroses caught up and crushed the carriage without mercy. Not too far away from that scene, Root was calmly using his skill guidepost. Its range allowed him to perceive danger from far ahead, far enough to sense even those unfortunate people being wiped out by the great horns. He turned back toward the carriage he was guiding and informed them that a massive herd of great horns was up ahead. Taking a detour would take longer, but it would be safe. The woman riding behind immediately expressed her relief, saying she was glad they had hired him, especially since monster numbers had exploded in the area lately. Root simply thanked her, all the while thinking about how guidepost worked. His skill didn't find treasure or enemies to fight. It identified the safest possible route for any journey. That was how he had always ensured that the people he guided reached their destination alive. Her husband, however, scoffed. He questioned why they were thanking someone like Root at all, mocking the idea of guidepost and suggesting there probably weren't any monsters ahead. In his eyes, Root was just making things up. Hearing this, Root could only think to himself that because his skill prevented danger before it ever appeared. People treated him this way every single day. Another man joined in, telling Root to stop acting important and insulting him as a weakling with a useless skill. Root didn't argue. He just laughed quietly, his thoughts drifting elsewhere. Magic stones taken from dungeons powered nearly everything in the world, from city lighting to weapons and armor, making them indispensable to daily life. Yet those same dungeons were overflowing with monsters, turning them into death traps. Because of this, adventurers with combat-oriented skills were highly valued, living privileged lives and earning the admiration of society. Compared to them, people with non-combat skills were labeled as having bum skills and looked down on without hesitation. Eventually, the carriage reached the city safely once again. The woman thanked Root sincerely as she paid him for his work. Before the moment could end, her husband snatched the money and deliberately dropped it onto the ground, shouting that it was all Root's fault. Because of him, they had been delayed. The man kept shouting that the more merchants had beaten them to the city because of Root. By now, he claimed all the customers in the market were probably gone. If it hadn't been for that cowardly complaining, he never would have hired a fraud like him in the first place. Root didn't argue. He said nothing at all, simply crouching down and quietly picking up the coins scattered on the ground. Someone else clicked their tongue and muttered that they would have rather kept the money than pay a con artist. Another chimed in, asking the leader if he didn't think the same. The leader, however, surprised everyone. He said no. On the contrary, that man was about to become very rich. Curious, he borrowed a bird's eye skill to check the mountain path they had avoided. Just as the guide had warned, a massive herd of great horns was roaming there. The more merchants never reached the city. In that moment, he understood that skill was real. The leader approached Root and introduced himself as Marks, the leader of the Steel Moon Guild. He said he wanted Root's help in conquering a dungeon, relying on that very skill. The proposal left Root stunned. He could only ask if Marks truly meant using his guidepost. Later, the two of them sat in a cafe calmly enjoying coffee. Root repeated what he had understood so far, that many adventurers had already challenged the newly discovered Emerald Dew Labyrinth, yet not a single one had returned alive. Marks confirmed it, adding that one adventurer had managed to report finding the Tears of Emerald Dew magic stone from inside the dungeon. After that, there had been no further news. Root reasoned that the return path must be far more dangerous than the way in. Marks smiled and said he was quick to grasp things. That was exactly where Guidepost came in. Hearing this, everything finally clicked for Root. If he used his skill, he could guarantee a safe route back. Marks assured him that a proper reward was prepared and casually revealed a pouch of coins, offering a success fee of 30 gold coins. Root nearly choked in shock. 30 gold coins was half a year's wages for him. With that much money, he could finally give his little sister a comfortable life. As the coins glinted before his eyes, his thoughts drifted to her. He remembered the woman who used to scream at him, calling him a creepy brat and a useless freeloader, demanding to know who he thought was keeping a roof over their heads. Root and his sister had worked non-stop every day, yet the woman never stopped yelling. She had even threatened that if he couldn't earn his keep, she would sell him off without hesitation. Root begged her to stop. The woman didn't take it well at all, snapping back and asking what kind of attitude that was. She reminded him of her so-called generosity, saying she had taken in 2 orphans after their parents died. Root lowered his head and said he would repay everything, asking only for a little more time. She sneered, saying he had quite the nerve. If the back rent wasn't paid by the end of the month, the girl would be sold off as a slave. Root said he understood and promised it wouldn't come to that. Then he turned to his sister with a forced smile, telling her everything would be fine and that he would never let that happen. His sister broke down crying and called out to him, and the two of them hugged tightly. Pulling himself back to the present, Root thought about her again. His little sister, Rona, was much younger than him and had also awakened what people called a bum skill. Not long after she was born, their parents were killed by monsters that escaped from a nearby dungeon. It had been a massive, terrifying creature far beyond what ordinary people could handle. No matter how hard they fought, they were powerless against it. Now another monster lay before him, but this time was different. The party members, along with Marks, managed to bring it down. Someone let out a relieved breath, and another casually placed a foot on the fallen monster. Root couldn't hide his amazement and said it was incredible. Marks glanced at him and told him it was probably his first time in a dungeon. He advised Root to stay close and follow from the back. Another party member urged everyone to pick up the pace. Root quickly apologized and said they should move. One of the women in the group suddenly spoke up, mentioning that she had been recruited back in the city. She recalled how Marks had told her that training the next generation was an adventurer's duty and invited her to join the raid. Root commented that Marks sounded like a good man. The girl laughed nervously and admitted it was her first time, apologizing in advance if she caused any trouble. Her awkward laughter made it obvious how tense she was. Root reassured her, saying it was his first time as well, and laughed along with her to ease the mood. That was when another member scoffed, calling Root a skill-less guidepost user, a coward whose only talent was running away from monsters. Marks immediately shut that down, saying he was the one who personally asked for Root's help. He added that the return trip was always the most dangerous part of any dungeon run, especially once mana was depleted and monsters began to respawn. Hearing that, the man stiffened and apologized without another word. Marks coldly told the man to watch his tongue and warned him not to undermine his authority. Root instinctively thanked him, but Marks shook his head and apologized instead, saying he had high expectations for him. Hearing that, Root couldn't help thinking that if all adventurers were dishonorable, he could accept dangerous jobs without constant anxiety. The girl laughed softly and commented that Mr. Marks really was a good man. Root laughed along, saying he was glad to hear that. As they pushed deeper into the dungeon, the atmosphere suddenly changed. Something incredible appeared before them, and Marks declared that they had found it, the Tears of Emerald Dew. One of the party members stared in awe, saying he could feel an overwhelming amount of mana radiating from it. Another, far less restrained, shouted that it was insane and wondered how much money they could get for it. At that moment, a warning flared in Root's mind. His guidepost skill reacted, sensing danger. He urgently shouted for them to stop, warning that if the magic stone was taken, the path back would disappear. Unfortunately, it was already too late. One of the men had touched it, responding in confusion as the warning rang out. Marks immediately turned to Root and asked what his skill was showing. Root pointed ahead and explained that while he couldn't see the exact details, it looked like the return path would collapse and be completely sealed off. Marks calmly acknowledged this. Then something strange happened. Despite clearly being exhausted, the girl suddenly released a surge of aura, her mana flaring unnaturally. Root asked what she was doing, completely lost. The so-called reckless members laughed and said that with this, they had recovered all the mana they spent getting there. Soon after, the party's magician spoke up, declaring that this was where the real show began as he poured all of his mana into a spell called Quick Boost. The sudden surge of power left Root utterly confused. He asked again what they were doing, unable to make sense of it all. Marks finally explained, saying the spell wouldn't last long, so he would be brief. From the reports, he had assumed the dungeon would be filled with powerful traps, and clearing it would drain both mana and stamina. To deal with that, preparation was essential. That was why he had devised this plan. They needed a canary in the coal mine to trigger the traps ahead of them, and a living mana battery to restore everything they lost along the way. With those two elements in place, he was confident the dungeon could be cleared. In that moment, Root finally saw it. The benevolent leader he thought he knew vanished, revealing Marx's true ruthless face. Root immediately realized what had happened and accused Marx of tricking him. The girl protested as well, saying it couldn't be true. Marx only offered a brief apology, saying he couldn't afford to waste any more time. One of the men hurriedly grabbed the treasure and shouted for everyone to move. As they ran, Marx casually raised his fingers and hinted that, if an opportunity arose, they would act. The man laughed it off, saying that such an opportunity would never come, and the entire group fled without looking back. Even the mage tossed out a remark about how convincing their acting had been. In the blink of an eye, Root and the girl were left alone. They rushed toward the entrance only to find it completely sealed. The girl let out another nervous laugh, commenting that it looked like they were trapped. Inside, Root was spiraling into panic. He couldn't go back. Thoughts of Rona flooded his mind, and he desperately begged his skill to show him a way to survive. He activated Guidepost at once, and that was when he noticed something strange behind him, a throne. Confused, he wondered why something like that would be there. A notification appeared instructing him to destroy the throne and absorb the jet black magic stone. Without hesitation, he rushed forward and smashed it. When the throne shattered, the girl stared at the object left behind and pointed out that it was a magic stone, but black. Root asked if that was a problem. She explained that magic stones were associated with the 5 great elements, so a black one shouldn't exist at all. Root then said his guidepost was showing that the only way back required this. If there was even the slightest chance to survive, he was willing to take it. Before the girl could stop him, he swallowed the stone. She shouted in shock just as a monster drew dangerously close. Its tail lashed out in a massive strike, and they barely managed to avoid being killed. The moment passed, and suddenly everything changed. A notification appeared announcing that the jet black magic stone absorption was complete. It spoke of skill evolution and the release of restrictions on Guidepost. Root had no idea what that meant, and before he could process it, more notifications flooded in one after another: guides for subjugation, magic chants, evolution paths, magic circles, magic circuits, and something called the subjugation route guide. The sheer volume of information left him overwhelmed. Even so, one thought rose above the chaos. Maybe this was the true power of his guide skill now that its restrictions had finally been lifted. Root lifted his gaze to the monster looming right in front of him, its massive face filling his vision. His heart was racing, but he forced himself to steady his thoughts. In that moment, he decided he would trust his skill. Without hesitation, he selected the subjugation procedure guide. A new notification appeared instantly announcing that the subjugation guide for the green dragon had been initiated. At the same time, a red aura spread out and wrapped around the dragon's entire body. Clenching his fists, Root made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he would make it back alive. As a new notification appeared, instructing him to evade the enemy's attack to the left, Root processed it instantly, thinking that he needed to dodge left, and a huge arrow even appeared in his vision, clearly pointing the way. Still, confusion crept in. On the left was a massive pile of rubble. Charging straight into that felt suicidal. Running to the right would be far easier, so why was the system insisting on the left? As he hesitated, the dragon began charging up a devastating attack. Root's thoughts spiraled. Should he trust his own instincts, or should he trust the skill? In the end, he made his choice. He grabbed Lillian's attention and called for her to follow him. She barely had time to react before the dragon unleashed its attack. Pink flames flooded the entire area in a massive wave. Watching it happen, Root felt a chill run down his spine. He was overwhelmingly relieved he had trusted Guidepost. It was clearly a wide-range attack. Lillian was safe too, though visibly shaken. Root realized that if they had run out into the open, they would have been hit without a doubt. As he looked around more carefully, another terrifying detail caught his eye: a hidden spike pit beneath the rubble. The realization hit him hard. The entire room was practically a death trap. When the dragon finally finished its attack, Lillian called to him in panic. Root snapped back to reality, asking what they were supposed to do next. Before either of them could move, another notification appeared. This time, it was a magic circuit guide instructing him to open Lillian's magic circuit and unleash the Great Archmage spell. The message stunned him. A Great Archmage spell? Lillian called his name again. Her voice filled with fear, but despite everything, Root felt strangely confident. He didn't understand how, but he knew he could do this. Following the guide, he began absorbing Lillian's aura through the magic circuit. Almost immediately, her expression changed. She gasped in shock, saying her mana was overflowing and asking what was happening to her. Root ignored the panic and focused on the system, urgently checking what came next. A new instruction appeared. The chant guide told him to recite specific chant to maximize magical output with the green dragon set as the target. Root told Lillian to repeat after him. Without hesitation, she followed along. They began together calling out the words, invoking the blaze of the heavens and the flame of the earth. As their voices overlapped, the chant continued, summoning the spirits of the inferno and commanding them to gather their power to become a breath of absolute destruction that pulsed in time with the beating of his heart. The final words left their mouths together, burn it all and reduce everything to ash. The moment the flame breath was unleashed, an enormous torrent of fire surged straight toward the dragon and slammed into it head-on. The impact triggered a massive explosion, violent enough to shake the entire chamber. It was terrifying to witness. Lillian could barely finish her sentence, stunned by the sheer power of it. Before there was any time to recover, Root noticed another notification. It instructed him to immobilize the green dragon by using the environment. Even as the message registered, the dragon began to recover from the blast, its gaze locking onto them once again. Lillian panicked, saying she couldn't keep going and that they needed to run. Root refused. He said they were ending this here and now. As the dragon charged again, Root urgently told her to strike the stalagmite with her magic. Lillian froze, confused, asking why. Root didn't explain. He just told her to do it. She broke down, shaking her head and yelling that she didn't want to die. Seeing her like that, Root suddenly remembered someone from his past. In that moment, he finally understood her fear. Instead of shouting, he grabbed her shoulders and spoke calmly, telling her she wouldn't die, that if she listened to him, she would get out alive. All she had to do was trust him. Those words were exactly what Lillian needed. Something steadied inside her. Even as the dragon charged straight at them, she raised her hand and activated her fireball skill. There was only a small puff of energy and nothing else. Confused, she asked if something was supposed to happen. Root was just as unsure. He only knew what to do, not how it would unfold. The dragon closed the distance in an instant, looming right in front of them, ready to strike. Both of them were terrified, but just as it was about to pounce, the rubble above suddenly collapsed. The same area that had been scorched earlier gave way, and massive chunks of stone crashed down onto the dragon. Lillian instinctively covered herself trembling while Root stared in disbelief. When the dust settled, they both realized what had happened. Lillian stammered that they had actually done it. Root nodded, saying they had beaten it. Then another notification appeared stating that the subjugation procedure was continuing. At the same time, the dragon began to move again. Color drained from Lillian's face as she looked up at the towering monster and muttered that this had to be a joke. Lillian was shaking badly. She said she couldn't go on anymore, that she was completely out of mana. Then all of a sudden, she realized there was no one beside her. She was alone in the cold, dark space. When she looked up again, the monster was right there about to swallow her whole. Terror washed over her face as she whispered, barely able to breathe, wondering if he had left her behind again. The dragon's jaws were wide open above her when a stone suddenly struck its head. Even as Lillian cried and curled up covering her head, a voice rang out taunting monster. Root called out to the overgrown lizard, telling it that the black magic stone it had been guarding was already inside him. The dragon instantly turned its attention away from her and toward Root. Root challenged it, saying that if it wanted the stone back, it should come and get him. Hearing his voice and seeing him standing there sparked a faint sense of hope in Lillian. At the same time, fear twisted in her chest for his safety. Root, meanwhile, silently urged the dragon to come after him. As if on cue, the monster charged straight toward him. Root ran with everything he had. Lillian screamed his name in panic, watching as the dragon closed the distance. Root could feel its presence right behind him, its massive jaws opening wide, ready to snap shut. Then, in the next instant, the ground gave way. The dragon plunged into a hidden spike pit. Only then did Root finally slow down, gasping for breath. He was exhausted to the bone. A notification appeared stating that the subjugation guide had been followed by luring the target into the spike pit. Root couldn't help thinking that everything had gone exactly as the guide had planned. The dragon was no longer able to move. Lillian rushed over, calling his name, and threw her arms around him. Root returned the embrace, saying her name softly. Another notification appeared announcing that the green dragon had been successfully subjugated. Root breathed out in relief and said that they had done it. As the tension faded, Root noticed something new. An exit had appeared. They slowly stood up, but Lillian was completely out cold by then, so Root lifted her onto his back. He thanked his luck, thinking that defeating the boss had caused an escape route to open. Before they could leave, another notification asked him to retrieve the magic stone. It rose up above the dragon's body, glowing faintly. When Root finally stepped out of the cave and felt sunlight on his skin again, a smile spread across his face. He said they had made it back alive. The relief washed over him all at once, and as soon as the words left his mouth, his strength gave out. He collapsed, utterly exhausted. A short while later, a calm voice greeted him with a good morning. Root stirred at the sound and slowly regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he found himself surrounded by several guards standing nearby. One of them stepped forward, looked down at him, and asked if he was Root. Seeing so many unfamiliar faces in front of him, Root instinctively asked who they were. Before anyone else could answer, Lillian hurriedly called his name, clearly relieved to see him awake. Root turned to her, and she quickly explained that they had collapsed near the dungeon entrance and were found by these people. One of them stepped forward and offered a handshake, introducing himself as Kairi from the Sword of the Golden Lion. He explained that their party had been sent to investigate a dungeon no one had ever returned from. But judging by the situation, it looked like it had already been cleared. Root was still trying to process everything when Kairi added that Lillian had already told him what happened. He remarked that it must have been brutal. An S-rank green dragon appearing in an E-rank dungeon explained perfectly why no one had survived before. Despite that, Kairi laughed along with his teammates, openly impressed. Taking down an S-rank monster with just the two of them was no small feat, and he said they would be honored if Root wanted to join their party. Lillian immediately decided to herself that Root's new skill had to remain a secret. She couldn't allow anyone to exploit him again. Root, flustered by the praise, said he really wasn't that strong. Kairi didn't push further and simply told him to think about it after getting some proper rest. Soon after, they set off in a carriage. Kairi mentioned that Root's town lay along the road to the capital, so giving them a ride was no trouble at all. As the carriage rolled forward, Root held onto the magic stone, his thoughts drifting. With stones like these, he could finally pay off the rent and debts that had been crushing him. Rona, who only had a so-called bum skill like shadow use, could finally live a normal life. The thought made him smile. Kairi's voice broke his train of thought. He mentioned that unstable dungeons had been appearing more frequently. Monsters stronger than their listed rank, sudden stampedes, complete collapses of balance. If that dungeon had remained registered as low rank, it would have led to a catastrophe. Root agreed, adding that a new low-rank dungeon had recently appeared near his hometown as well. Some adventurers had entered it, but there had been no news since. At that, Kairi fell silent. Moments later, the carriage driver suddenly shouted and pointed ahead. Smoke was rising from the direction of the town. Was it on fire? The moment Root realized it was his hometown, his chest tightened with dread. Far away, back in the town, Rona stood frozen in fear after hearing the rumors spreading through the streets. Her face went pale as a single thought echoed in her mind. Had her brother died? Mark stood in front of her with a solemn expression and said he was sorry. The enemy had been too strong, he explained. There had been nothing they could do, not even a chance to retrieve Root's belongings. A unit had already been dispatched to seal the dungeon, and they would recover her brother's body soon enough. Then, almost casually, he brought up the death benefit paid to adventurers who died in dungeons. He added that he understood she wasn't in the right state of mind to deal with paperwork. Since they also had a report to file, handling the process for her would be no trouble at all. It was their duty after all. All they needed was her signature on a power of attorney. He asked gently whether she could write. Behind him, the mage thought to himself that Marx was putting on quite the performance. One of the other members muttered that they would grab the benefit money and get out of town as fast as possible. Marx then mentioned her father, saying he had been an adventurer too. Was she living off his death benefit now? She nodded and answered honestly. Her father had been a swordsman, called on quests all over the world. Her brother had always wanted to follow in his footsteps. Marx replied that receiving this benefit would at least be what her brother would have wanted. Even so, doubt lingered in her heart. Something felt off. She wondered if they were really telling the truth. Quietly, she decided to ask the shadows. Activating her skill, she let the shadow user ability spread. At that very moment, a bell rang outside. Shouts echoed through the streets, warning of a monster stampede and telling everyone to run. Hearing the commotion, Marx frowned and commented on how noisy it had suddenly become. In his mind, he reasoned that removing the magic stones from the dungeon must have agitated the monsters. Either way, it would be best to leave before they got dragged into it. He said they should wrap things up quickly, claiming they needed to go protect the town. That was when she asked where they thought they were going. A dark, shadowy aura began to seep out around her, thick and oppressive. Even Marx felt a chill run through him. As the shadows deepened, she accused him directly, saying he had killed her brother. Behind her, a massive shadowy figure began to move, its hands slowly rising. Her scream echoed through the room, filled with grief and fury. Marx tried to backpedal, saying they didn't even know for sure whether her brother was dead. She immediately called out the lie, adding that the whole excuse about protecting the town was false as well. One of the men stepped forward unsettled, asking what had gotten into her, disturbed by the strange presence she was giving off. Marx narrowed his eyes. Somehow she had seen straight through them. Now that she knew the truth, there was only one option left. He ordered his men to trash the room. If they did it right, it would look like she had simply been another victim of the stampede. Outside, Lillian screamed Root's name as he staggered forward, forcing his exhausted body to run straight toward the monsters swarming the town. Root shouted Rona's name in return, panic driving him onward. Kyrie chased after him calling out as well, but Root barely heard anything. He rushed straight into his house. Inside, he froze. Rona was lying on the ground. For a moment, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. He dropped to his knees, calling her name over and over. Weakly, she answered him. Relief crashed into him all at once. He told her to hold on, that he was there, that he would take care of her wounds. But Rona only smiled, saying she was just glad he was alive. She had really thought he was dead. Root told her not to say things like that, insisting that he was alive right there with her. Rona, still smiling, said that the adventurers who came had gotten what they deserved. Her words confused him. He asked what she meant, what adventurers she was talking about. Instead of answering, she shivered and said she felt cold. She asked where he had gone. Her voice was growing faint. Panic seized him. He grabbed her shoulders and told her he was right there, begging her not to drift away. Rona looked up at him one last time and whispered for him not to die. Then her body went limp. Root could do nothing but cry, his voice breaking as he clutched her. There had to be a way. There had to be something his skill could do. If he couldn't even save his own sister, then Guidepost meant nothing. He activated it. A notification appeared stating that there was no suitable treatment environment and that standard treatment was impossible. Then a new option was presented, a special route. Fusing the target soul with his own could temporarily extend her life. Through his tears, Root repeated the words in disbelief. Fuse his soul with Rona's? Another prompt appeared asking whether execute the target soul fusion protocol to preserve life. He didn't hesitate for even a second. If it would save Rona, he would do anything. The system responded. The green dragon magic stone was linked to something called the Verdant Prism. Activating, it would assimilate Rona's body and soul into his own. Verdant Prism activation confirmed. A powerful aura spread through the room, enveloping both of them. Root felt it surge into his body, overwhelming and unfamiliar. In that instant, fragments of memories flowed into him. He realized they were Rona's, then he heard it. Monsters. A group of them had entered the house. Root stood alone now. His grief hardened into something darker when a familiar name surfaced in his mind, Marx. As the monsters lunged, a shadowy blade flashed through the air, instantly cutting one of them down. Even as he slaughtered them with his newly awakened shadow powers, his voice shook with rage. They had used him as bait, and worse than that, they had laid a hand on Rona. The monsters hesitated, clearly confused by the words pouring out of him. They had no idea what this human was talking about. Root didn't care. The moment he fully activated the shadow user skill, a deadly red aura flooded the room, thick and suffocating, pressing down on everything within it. His fury was overwhelming, far beyond what the monsters could comprehend. Through clenched teeth, he repeated Marx's name, vowing that he would never forgive him, never, not for anything. Outside the town, monsters were already collapsing one after another as Kairi cut through them. Reports came in saying the area was secure. Kairi gave quick orders, saying the local parties could handle the east side on their own while her group would take the west. That was when she noticed something off. Not long after, they found Root. Lillian saw him first and remarked that it looked like he hadn't come out unscathed. Kairi was clearly worried too, telling him that the subjugation was almost complete and urging him to get somewhere safe. Root didn't argue. He thanked them, then calmly said he was going on a journey to save his sister. Lillian immediately refused to be left behind, insisting she would come with him and that she could help. Root didn't deny her, but before anything else, he silently asked the system to show him the path forward. A notification appeared selecting an extermination procedure guide and initiating a subjugation guide, this time targeting Steel Moon. Root's expression hardened. Those people, he decided, would never be forgiven. 3 months later, the scene shifted to the adventure city of Belfast. The city was lively and full of noise. Adventurers laughed and bragged, spirits high after another successful dungeon run. Root and Lillian were there as well, blending into the crowd. Around them, people boasted that today's dungeon had been easy, mocking the locals for struggling with it and calling them amateurs. Despite the cheerful atmosphere, Lillian felt uneasy. She mentioned that their group seemed to be growing, but she couldn't shake a bad feeling about some of the people tagging along. Her unease deepened when someone loudly suggested going after a legendary giant spider next. Another clarified they meant the shadowless spider, the one that hunted using invisible threads. Ever since it had nested in the gorge, no one had dared to go near the place. Someone else laughed and said that kind of spider would be tough for most people but not for Marx. According to him, Marx could take it down in a single hit. The moment that name was spoken, Lillian visibly flinched. Before things could continue, a new group stepped forward. Their leader announced that they were the White Wolf Fong, a well-known crew of hardened adventurers in Belfast. He said Root's group had guts for talking about the shadowless spider, but they should learn to discipline their men first. If the one running his mouth didn't stop immediately, he would be killed. Marx responded calmly, agreeing that some discipline was indeed necessary. Marx suddenly let out a confused sound, and in the very next moment, he activated his skill. He grabbed the man who had been acting like the boss of the White Wolf Fong. The others shouted at him to let their leader go, but Marx didn't even bother responding. He slammed the man straight into his own companions, sending all of them flying. Cheers immediately erupted from Marx's group. They chanted his name, reveling in his display of power, and Marx soaked it all in, clearly enjoying the attention. From a short distance away, Root and Lillian watched everything unfold. Lillian quietly remarked that Marx must have powered up using that magic stone. Root agreed, thinking that taking him head-on would be impossible. Then he spoke softly, telling Lillian that this was their chance. He apologized in advance and said he would need her help. At the same time, a notification appeared before him initiating the subjugation guide for Steel Moon. Lillian didn't hesitate and simply said she was ready. Not long after, Marx and his companions were riding together in a carriage. One of them commented that they had already cleaned out all the profitable dungeons in the city. Another said it was about time they moved on. Marx agreed. Someone suggested going after the legendary shadowless spider, but Marx immediately shut that down. There was no need, he said. They would just clear some random dungeon and leave the city. Even if things got dangerous, they now had plenty of disposable people they could use as decoys. One of the men joked that they could go collect another death benefit. Marx laughed it off, saying he was done with that kind of hassle. Hearing this conversation sent a chill down Root's and Lillian's spines. As the carriage continued on, one of the men frowned and asked if they were really heading in the right direction. Another said he thought the dungeon was up in the mountains. The first man snapped back, demanding confirmation. Before anyone could argue further, someone at the back suddenly froze and shouted in alarm. A thin thread had wrapped around him. Before the others could react, his body was yanked violently into the air. As everyone turned, they saw him being dragged away by something unseen. In an instant, realization spread through the group. This was the shadowless spider's nest. More massive spiders began emerging around them. Panic set in. Someone shouted for the carriage to turn back immediately. When they did, the man who had been shouting earlier felt his blood run cold. Standing behind them were Root and Lillian. He stammered in disbelief, recognizing them. Marks also turned and locked eyes with them, instantly understanding who it was. The carriage screeched to a halt. Root and Lillian stepped forward, moving a little farther ahead, blocking the path as the trap finally closed in. Marks looked at Root and said he understood now. It was good that Root was still alive. Back then, they had only been rookies, he admitted. But thanks to the magic stones, they had grown far stronger and gathered a much larger crew. In a twisted way, he even thanked Root for that. As repayment, he declared that he would be taking their heads. He drew his sword without hesitation. Root, however, said he was relieved. Marks was just as rotten as he remembered, which meant there was no need to hold back anymore. Marks gave a low and started walking toward him, blade in hand. That was when he noticed movement behind him. The moron member was already stepping forward, gripping his massive axe. He told Marks to hurry up and kill Root so they could leave. Then he turned his attention to Root and mocked him, calling him a bum-skill weakling. He bragged that this time, he would leave him for dead with no chance of escape, swinging his weapon arrogantly. The blade suddenly struck something invisible. Root calmly pointed out that wildly swinging a weapon in a place like this meant he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings. The man didn't understand at first and asked what he meant, then realization hit him. Fear crept into his voice as he noticed his body being pulled upward. His axe dragged along with him. The spiders had him. He panicked, screaming for help, begging to be let down, but there was no stopping it. The spiders had already claimed so many victims. One more made no difference to them. Marks turned sharply and demanded to know what Root had done. Root answered with a chilling smile, saying he hadn't done anything at all. He told Marks to simply watch his step. This was the shadowless spiders' hunting ground, layered with invisible thread traps everywhere. Surely they hadn't forgotten. After all, they were the ones who had tried to trap and kill him and Lillian. As he spoke, the truth became obvious. Threads filled the area, crisscrossing the space in every direction, nearly impossible to see. Root's expression darkened as he finished speaking. They had laid a hand on Rona, and for that, they would pay with their lives. The man trapped in the web was completely panicking now. He screamed for them to stop wasting time and hurry up to save him. The mage froze, not knowing what to do, then hurriedly said she would help as soon as she could. Root and Lillian remained where they were. Root kept scanning the surroundings while the mage desperately began casting a spell. A moment later, her face went pale. She realized it was an anti-magic field. At that point, it became obvious there was nothing that could be done. The trapped man understood it too. His resistance faded as despair set in. Not long after, the spiders closed in, calmly finishing their meal. Watching this, the remaining members completely lost their nerve. They shouted in disbelief that this couldn't be happening, that they couldn't do anything, and decided to run for their lives. But it was useless. They couldn't see the invisible threads, and the spiders had an easy time picking them off one by one. Marks, however, didn't move. He stood there in silence, thinking deeply as everything unfolded. Finally, he spoke, saying he understood now it was a trap layered inside another trap. He let his sword fall from his hand and calmly remarked that this was how it was. Everyone had abandoned him. Surely there were more traps prepared than just these. Then he mentioned Rona by name. He mocked her, calling her a good little sister who always looked out for her big brother, and said it was pitiful. He even laughed, adding that maybe her brother wouldn't have suffered so much if she had been more gullible. That was when Root drew his sword. This was exactly what Marks had been waiting for. In his mind, he felt satisfied. Root was angry now. Even after setting all those traps, he still wanted the satisfaction of striking him down personally. That was why he was holding a sword he wasn't even used to. To Marks, it was obvious. Such a weapon would be useless against him. It was time to counter. As Root walked toward him, burning with rage, Marks burst into laughter. He taunted Root, telling him to come at him, saying that with such pathetic strength he would never avenge his sister. He insulted him again, calling him a useless bumskill scrub, and swung his sword. Their blades collided. A violent surge of aura exploded outward from the clash. The impact sent shockwaves through the air. Marks's expression shifted in shock. Even Lillian was stunned by what she was seeing. Root, however, remained calm. This was exactly as planned. Marks stared at the aura surrounding Root in disbelief. He said it was impossible. That strike felt like it came from a master swordsman. Back in the dungeon, Root had fought like a complete amateur. How could this be? Root answered coldly, saying he would show him what true despair looked like. Marks sneered despite his surprise, telling Root not to get too cocky. Marks began drawing even more power from his magic stone, confident to the point of arrogance. He declared that once the jade magic stone fully empowered him, there was no way he could lose. Root simply watched in silence, his expression calm to the point of being unsettling. With a roar, Marks charged forward, launching a fierce attack. Root dodged and blocked it cleanly. Lillian cried out in alarm, but Root showed no sign of panic. He was handling it. Marks gritted his teeth and shouted that this was the end, swinging again with even greater force. But this time, he didn't target Root. He went straight for Lillian. He sneered that unlike Root, he wasn't foolish enough to face threats head-on. Either Root would disable the traps and tell him how to escape, or they would all die there together. The choice was Root's. In his mind, Marks was already calculating. Even if he killed them both now, he was still trapped in the web and would end up spider food. It was better to use Lillian as a hostage, escape first, and finish things later. From his perspective, everything was going exactly as it should. Root was right in front of him, and Lillian was under his control. He mocked Root, saying there was no point hesitating. Root couldn't win against him. He demanded an answer and threatened that if Root didn't choose, he would kill her. What Marks didn't realize was that something was already standing right behind him. A strange sensation made him turn around, and his eyes widened in shock. It wasn't another ally. It was a shadow, one far too real, a shadowy knight. Before he could react, he felt his power slipping away. The jade magic stone was being pulled from him. Panic flooded his face as he screamed about his stone, about his power. At that moment, Root rushed forward. He told Marks that he hadn't been listening. He was about to experience it, the same despair he had inflicted on them and on Rona. Root's blade flashed as he struck. Marks couldn't believe it. All his scheming, all his confidence, he had never imagined it would end like this. Invisible threads still hung above, but below him was only doom. No spider had touched him until now, yet his own actions had finally caught up to him. Then he felt it. Something massive was approaching. He froze as he turned and saw a gigantic spider crawling toward him. He screamed for it to stop, begging, apologizing, then lashing out in hysterical threats. He shouted that his brother would find out that Root would regret this, begging for help as he was dragged away. As Root and Lillian turned to leave, Root calmly remarked that once the magic stone's power was fully severed, Marks's death would be quick. His screams echoed behind them as the spider claimed him. Lillian whispered that it was the shadowless spider, the leader of all the others. Root clenched his fist. In his heart, he spoke to Rona, telling her that he had taken revenge on those who hurt her. No matter what, he would save her. The spiders began closing in around them, and Lillian called out Root's name in fear. Root, however, was already focused elsewhere. A new notification had appeared before his eyes. Subjugation Procedure Guide, Shadowless Spider. Root steadied himself. The revenge was over. Now he would put an end to the legend of the shadowless spider. The spiders began weaving their threads non-stop, layering them until it felt like there was no way out. Lillian panicked and said they were completely surrounded. Root told her not to worry, assuring her they could handle it. One of the spiders lunged straight at them. Root cut it down in a single slash. Another immediately started spinning more webbing. Lillian tried attacking, but quickly realized it wasn't enough. She said her spells weren't working the way she needed them to. Root observed that the spiders were far tougher than they looked and decided it was time to use something else. He drew on the power of the jade magic stone. Lillian instantly recognized it as the one Marks had been using. Root confirmed it, saying that Marks didn't need it anymore and that he could feel power overflowing from it. A new notification appeared instructing him to activate the tears of the Emerald Eye and direct magical energy upward. More webs came flying at them, but shadows gathered around Root. The darkness moved on its own, striking out at the spiders from every direction. Seeing this, Lillian finally felt a sense of hope. Maybe they really could get out of this alive. Root remarked that to use his power properly, he had first needed to grow stronger. Another notification appeared, this one granting him swordsmanship, synchronizing his mind and body with the movements and instincts of a master swordsman. With that, he declared that it was their turn now and charged forward. Lillian looked around in shock, realizing that this was truly the spider's nest. This wasn't some simple trap at all. Another guide activated, telling Root that Guidepost would provide the safest route to a chosen destination. He immediately understood that was the true strength of his power. It would always show him the safest path forward. Following that guidance, he moved through the battlefield, his shadowy power cutting down spiders one after another. Even so, he noticed the invisible threads everywhere just as dangerous as he had expected. Lillian warned him that more spiders were closing in from behind. Root shouted for her to move, trusting the shadowy presence to cover them. When a spider tried to grab Lillian, she reacted instantly, firing off a fireball that blasted it away. But then the true threat appeared, the massive boss spider. Lillian cried out that her attacks weren't working and that she couldn't keep going like this. Before the spider could reach her, the shadow surged forward and cut it down with a single clean strike. Lillian was safe. She gasped as the shadowy figure moved closer to her, instinctively flinching. Then she relaxed. Despite the fear, she knew it wasn't an enemy. It was there to protect them. Lillian thanked him softly. Root stepped up beside her and said it was about to get serious. The brood mother had arrived. As the massive spider emerged, he told her he would need her help for this one. Lillian didn't hesitate and answered yes right away. A new notification appeared explaining that the magic circuit guide would optimize her mana flow without burdening her body, temporarily unlocking power far beyond her normal limits. An intense aura wrapped around Lillian, and she stared at herself in shock. Root told her he had unlocked her magic and ordered her to hit the brood mother with everything she had. She gathered an enormous fireball and hurled it forward. The explosion engulfed the spider mother in flames. Lillian gasped in excitement, saying she had done it and that it felt incredible, only to freeze a second later. The brood mother was still standing, charging straight toward them. Panic surged through her as she cried out in disbelief. Root, however, remained calm. He explained that it was fine. The attack hadn't been meant to kill it. The real goal was to burn away the webs and scatter the smaller spiders. With the threads gone, they could finally move freely without the risk of being dragged away. Now he could focus entirely on finishing the fight. Lillian could only stare in awe. Before launching his final attack, Root addressed the spiders calmly. He said he held no personal grudge against them, but he would exterminate them to achieve his goal. Then he charged forward. In a single overwhelming slash, he cut down the brood mother. The gigantic spider collapsed, defeated at last. Lillian stood there in shock. She said it was incredible. One-shotting a subjugation rank, a shadowless spider would earn an enormous reward if reported to the guild. Root simply smiled and replied that he wouldn't be returning to the city. He had something far more important to do, and besides, he had already received a greater reward. He opened his hand, revealing a deep purple stone. A notification identified it as a purple shadow stone, an item that used its holder's mana to conceal their presence from the world. Lillian immediately recognized it and said it was extremely rare. She realized then that this must have been how the shadowless spiders created their invisible threads. Root said he would be taking it. He needed it to meet the one person who could save Rona. When Lillian asked who that was, Root answered without hesitation. His destination was the Witch of the World Tree, Verdant. Lillian froze. Stumbling over her words, she said that the Witch of the World Tree, Verdant, was her mother. Lillian immediately panicked and said that Verdant was a terrifying woman who would never lend her power to anyone. She begged Root to stop and asked if there wasn't any other way. Root answered calmly that it was impossible. He had already used guideposts to explore every possible route, and every single one led to Verdant. Hearing that only made Lillian more afraid. After a moment, she said she was grateful that he had saved her. But if he was truly going to meet Verdant, then this was where she would part ways with him. She turned to leave, but Root grabbed her sleeve and stopped her. He begged her not to go, saying that without her, he couldn't save his sister. Seeing the man who had saved her now bowing his head and pleading shook her badly. She was nervous, conflicted, and unsure of herself. In the end, she didn't resist anymore. Without saying much, she quietly continued walking alongside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Eventually, Lillian muttered to herself, wondering why she was such a pushover. Root just laughed softly and thanked her. He said that her existence was the only key they had to reaching Verdant. Then he asked gently why she was so afraid. After all, she was Verdant's daughter. He added that she didn't have to talk about it if she didn't want to. Even so, the words stirred memories she couldn't easily suppress. Lillian shuddered, then said it was fine. She explained that Verdant had borne 3 daughters from the fruit of the world tree, each meant to be her successor. The eldest, Elvira, had mastered mana control the moment she was born. She could manipulate the weather itself and was known as the Storm Witch. The second, Floria, had perfected an unmatched form of alchemy. She created legendary golems and was called the Witch of Soulcraft. Root reacted in surprise, saying he had heard those names whispered in rumors before. Lillian continued, saying that compared to them, she had very little mana and could only use basic fire magic. Her thoughts drifted back to 2 years earlier. In the jungle, someone had shouted that they were out of wine. Lillian had immediately answered and hurried over, calling out to Elvira that she was coming. As she rushed through the area, she tripped after bumping into a golem and nearly fell. One of her sisters warned her not to run while looking away, saying it was dangerous. Lillian thanked her apologetically. Elvira, however, impatiently demanded to know how long she planned to keep her waiting. Lillian hurriedly apologized again and said she was coming. Floria laughed and told her she didn't need to act like a maid. A golem walked over and delivered the drink to Elvira, who brightened at the sight. Then, with a casual smile, she said the golems were far more useful than Lily ever was. If that was the case, she added coldly, then a failure like her should hurry up and disappear. Hearing those cruel words crushed Lillian. The label of failure kept echoing in her mind, dragging her deeper into despair. For a moment, Floria spoke up, telling her not to listen to Elvira and insisting that she wasn't a failure. That single sentence gave Lillian a fragile sense of hope. Shattered instantly. Floria continued, her expression darkening as she said that Lillian did have an important role to play as a test subject to measure her golem's durability. The fear that washed over Lillian was even worse than before. Floria then casually remarked that the space was too cramped and suggested taking things outside. Lillian begged her to wait, but her words were ignored. Outside, the golem began attacking her relentlessly. Lillian cried and sobbed, asking why they were doing this to her. Floria answered calmly that at the World Tree, it was only sisters and their mother. When a witch created a new toy, another witch simply had to test it. That was all there was to it. Lillian shouted no, but Floria only warned her to be careful. This golem, she said, wasn't programmed to hold back. The golem rushed her with a massive punch. Lillian barely dodged in time and instinctively hurled a fireball as it turned. The spell struck, but it barely scratched the golem. Floria commented casually that it wasn't a bad attempt. Elvira, who had been watching, scoffed and said that maybe Lillian was just too weak. The golem attacked again, and again Lillian was struck. Elvira remarked that she wanted a turn. Floria refused, saying the golem wasn't built to withstand Elvira's level of power. Desperate, Lillian cast another fireball, but it still did nothing. Elvira mocked her again, calling her mana pathetic and saying she could only use fire magic. The golem seized Lillian. She screamed for her sister to help her. That was when Elvira finally stepped in. She said she was done holding back and summoned the Thunder Emperor sword. With a single devastating strike, she smashed the golem, the shockwave sending Lillian flying. The golem was badly damaged, and Floria shouted at Elvira not to break her toy. Elvira shot back that Floria shouldn't make such flimsy golems in the first place. Then a calm, cold voice cut through the chaos. Their mother told them they were being too noisy. If they wanted to play, they should do it more quietly. Elvira immediately apologized. Their mother added that they should at least avoid dirtying the garden. Floria obediently said she would clean everything up at once. Then their mother spoke again, her words cutting deeper than any blow. She referred to the broken golem as junk and to Lillian as trash and ordered that both be thrown out together. They were no longer of any use. Lillian heard every word. They told her that since she had been hired before, she was no longer needed now. With that, they threw Lillian out. She lay there heartbroken and empty. Floria didn't seem to care at all, at least not about her feelings, but there was something she did care about. She crouched down beside Lillian and spoke softly, almost cheerfully, asking if Lillian wanted to make herself useful one last time for her research. Lillian, trembling, wondered what she meant now. Floria explained that she had always wanted to try using a person as material for a golem. As if responding to her words, a nearby golem opened its jaw wide, ready for the experiment. Lillian was frozen in terror. Floria tilted her head and mused that their mother had forbidden experimenting on humans. Then she shrugged and added that their mother had also called Lillian trash. That made it sound fun, didn't it? Elvira joined in saying that by becoming a golem, Lily might finally be useful to them. Floria smiled and declared that it was time for her rebirth. As the golem reached out, Lillian broke down completely. She begged for help, crying and pleading, saying she didn't want to die. She prayed over and over, hoping someone, anyone, would save her. Elvira grew bored with the scene and sighed, saying she'd had enough. She told Floria they should leave. Floria hesitated and called out to her sister, but Elvira cut her off, saying she had made that offer for Lily's own good. Then she coldly asked how Lillian planned to repay such kindness. Before Lillian could say anything, Elvira ordered her to get out of her sight. The two of them turned and walked away. As they left, Elvira remarked that it was a shame. She had thought Lily might have become her strongest golem. Floria responded lightly, suggesting they work together to develop the ultimate golem instead. Their voices faded as they walked off. Left behind, Lillian finally collapsed into tears. The scene shifted back to the present with Lillian traveling alongside Root. After hearing everything, Root remained silent for a while. Then he muttered that it was a seriously messed up family. Lillian only replied that it was complicated. After another pause, Root asked if she was really willing to help him. Lillian answered yes without hesitation. He had saved her life and she had already made up her mind. Root nodded and said that if that was her resolve, he would honor it. He told her he would explain his goal and his abilities. Lillian admitted she had been curious and leaned in, visibly interested. Root said his goal was to save Rona. His abilities were Guide and Shadow User. Using the power of the Green Dragon's magic stone, he had fused Rona's dying soul with his own. When their souls merged, he had absorbed her ability as well. Lillian realized then that the Shadow Knight she had seen must have been Rona's power. Root said that was partly true. Rona's ability, Shadow User, allowed the user to freely manipulate their own shadow. Everyone, including Rona herself, had always thought it was a useless non-combat bum skill. Root said he had believed that too until his guide revealed its true potential. A shadow could take on any form the user imagined. When Lillian asked about the knight, Root explained that he had modeled it after his father who had been a swordsman. Lillian asked if that meant Rona could have done the same thing. Root shook his head and said no. Rona had been too gentle. She probably would have struggled to even imagine a warrior in the first place. He added that by imagining the Shadow Knight himself, he could then issue it commands through Guide, allowing it to act independently and attack enemies on its own. Lillian was genuinely amazed. She said that kind of fighting style was something only he could pull off. Root agreed, but added that he hadn't inherited full Shadow User ability. Lillian then asked what Guide really was. She had always thought it only showed the safest path. Root started to answer, but then they both sensed something. Lillian immediately recognized it, a great horn. The monster was already close. Rather than panic, Root thought the timing was perfect. He jumped off the carriage with his sword drawn and shouted to draw the monster's attention, luring it away. As he moved, he thought that the road to Verdant, the Witch of the World Tree, was filled with danger anyway. This was as good a chance as any to explain his ability to Lillian. A notification appeared initiating the subjugation procedure guide with the Great Horn as the target. Root readied his sword as shadows spread around him. Another instruction followed, telling him to use Shadow User to evade the incoming charge. He did so immediately. As he moved, Root calmly explained that Great Horns specialized in charging and impaling intruders. Their hides were incredibly tough, so tough that most blades couldn't even scratch them. The monster charged again just as expected. Root noted that despite its strength, its attack pattern was simple and straightforward. Following the guide, he used his shadow to strike at the right moment. The confirmation flashed, Shadow User activated. Another instruction followed, telling him when to strike. Root already knew what would happen. The monster lost its balance and crashed to the ground exactly as predicted. Root continued explaining that while its hide was nearly impenetrable, its belly was soft and exposed once it fell. The guide confirmed it, instructing him to strike the revealed weak point. Root delivered the finishing blow. Only then did he turn his attention back to Lillian and ask if now was a good time to properly explain what his guide skill really was. Lillian nodded without hesitation and said yes. Root explained that his guide ability had evolved because of the Raven Wing magic stone he had swallowed earlier. When Lillian asked what the strange window was, he told her that he usually kept it hidden. It was the navigation system of his guide skill. This was what his evolved guide really looked like. As more and more notification windows appeared, Lillian couldn't hide her shock. Root said that, after evolving, the amount of information the skill provided had increased drastically. The magic chant guide supplied incantations for high-level spells like the ones they had used before. The magic circuit guide manipulated mana flow inside the body to draw out latent magical potential. At that point, everything clicked for Lillian. She realized that was why she had been to use such overwhelming magic against the green dragon. Root corrected her gently. The magic circuit guide didn't create power. It only drew out what already existed. That strength had always been hers. He told her that she possessed the power of a great archmage inherited directly from the Witch of the World Tree. Lillian was stunned. She could barely believe it. Root looked at her seriously and told her she wasn't useless. The power of Verdant, the Witch of the World Tree, had been passed down to her. Hearing that made Lillian smile for the first time in a long while. She then asked if his guide also knew a way to save Rona and Verdant. Root answered that it did. His guide had already shown him the path. Lillian remarked that it sounded almost all-powerful. Root shook his head and said it wasn't quite that incredible. More accurately, it functioned like a prophetic analysis ability. Lillian agreed that description fit better. Looking back on everything that had happened, she understood. Root added that the skill subconsciously analyzed the environment and guided him toward the optimal solution, almost like an oracle. Even so, he admitted there was no guarantee Verdant could save Rona. But if anyone could, it was her. And to even meet her, they needed Lillian, her daughter. Lillian fell silent, fully understanding the weight of that. Later that night, as they rested by their campfire, she finally spoke again. She said that Root had saved her life. People had called her useless her entire life, but if she could be of use to him now, she would help in any way she could. Root thanked her quietly and said he owed her one. As their journey continued, Lillian suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. With awe in her voice, she said she could see it, the World Tree. Before long, the two of them stood facing the enormous World Tree itself. Lillian said it would still take about half a day to reach it from there and suggested they rest for the night. Root stared up at it in disbelief and said that even though they could see it clearly, it was still half a day away. That alone showed just how massive it was. Lillian added that the tree was over 200 years old and still growing. That revelation stunned Root. Then he noticed something else. Smoke. He suddenly started running and called out to Lillian, pointing it out. Lillian's expression changed immediately. If there was smoke coming from that direction, then there had to be a village nearby. When they arrived, they saw chaos. One of Floria's golems was rampaging through the area, smashing buildings and sending debris flying. The villagers looked exhausted and desperate. A few fighters were still standing their ground, shouting in disbelief that there were golems out here. A woman beside one of the knights said they would stop it there. The golem swung its massive fist. The knight leapt up and struck it mid-attack. But instead of going down, the golem reacted violently and turned toward him. The knight froze in shock, unable to understand what was happening. At that moment, a fireball slammed into the golem from the side. It was the woman casting magic. For a brief second, they wondered if that was enough. It wasn't. The golem rose again, completely unfazed. A calm voice echoed from within it, saying that magic of that level had already been accounted for and was useless. In the next instant, the knight was killed right in front of the woman. She froze, her body going stiff as she collapsed to the ground, unable to even scream. Trembling, she asked what the golem wanted. The voice replied that they had no ill will toward human lives. They simply required a few magically inclined humans as materials for their golems. The golem reached out toward her. Before it could touch her, a massive arrow flew through the air and struck the golem directly in the head. Root had arrived. Lillian was right behind him. The arrow pierced into the golem, though only partially. The voice inside let out an annoyed sigh, complaining that it was one thing after another. Root calmly remarked that this was a golem. Then a notification immediately appeared identifying the target as a golem. Root dismissed it as nothing more than a mud doll hardly worth worrying about. The golem sneered back, calling him a worthless bug with a lot of nerve. Then it began moving unnaturally fast in strange, almost erratic motions. Lillian warned that it was quick. Root told her not to worry. In the blink of an eye, the golem was right on top of him. And just as quickly Root moved. With a clean, effortless strike, he sliced the golem straight through. The massive body split apart and collapsed. The voice inside sounded genuinely surprised, commenting that not only had Root damaged the golem, he had cut it cleanly in two, something completely unexpected. The golem's shattered body twisted and reassembled itself in an instant as if nothing had happened. Cracks sealed, limbs reformed, and it stepped forward again, ready to fight. Root slipped past its next strike, narrowly avoiding something thin in the air and muttering that there were threads mixed in as well. The voice from inside the golem sounded pleased. It said someone like him would make excellent material. Root shot back that he didn't have a hobby of playing with dolls. The voice replied that it was a shame. It had thought they could have become the best of friends. That was when Lillian suddenly shouted a warning. The golem lunged again, but this time it paused. Its head turned toward her, and the voice reacted with mild surprise. In the next moment, the golem's upper body was blown apart from the inside. The massive shell collapsed, and a familiar figure stepped out. Floria emerged completely unharmed, brushing off debris as if it were nothing. Her eyes lit up the instant she saw Lillian. Well, if it wasn't little Lillian. She looked genuinely delighted and walked straight toward her. She asked if Lillian had come back for her, saying how happy that made her. Lillian, however, froze in place, fear flooding her face. Floria continued talking, saying she had reflected on what happened before and was sorry about it. Lillian could barely process what she was hearing. She whispered her sister's name in disbelief. Floria smiled. Then she calmly added that now, she could finally turn Lillian into an even more magnificent golem. Floria repeated herself, saying she knew she could do it. Lillian remained frozen, unable to move. Then Floria suddenly laughed and waved it off, saying she was just kidding. She claimed that ever since the day Lillian left, she had done nothing but regret it. Lillian immediately denied that. Floria smiled thinly and said she truly did regret it, regretted letting a failure like Lillian roam free in the world. She said she couldn't stop worrying that Lillian would tarnish their sisterhood's reputation and admitted that she regretted not killing her back then. Those words hit Lillian like a blade. Her fear returned in full force. This was exactly why she had never wanted to come before Floria could take another step. A sword slid into the space between her and Lillian. Root stood there, weapon raised, telling Floria that he and Lillian didn't have time for her games. Floria looked amused and remarked that hanging around with trash like Lillian, he should have all the time in the world. Lillian broke down crying and apologized instinctively. Root immediately told her to stop. She had nothing to apologize for. If Floria couldn't see her value, that only meant Floria was a terrible judge of character. That finally irritated Floria. She snapped back, demanding to know who he was calling a terrible judge of character. At the same time, the golem surged with energy and lunged forward. Root didn't hesitate. He stepped in and sliced the golem cleanly in two again. He calmly repeated that it was hardly an opponent. Floria sneered and reminded him that golems could be revived endlessly. As expected, the pieces began to repair themselves, but something was wrong. The regeneration stalled, movements turning sluggish and uneven. Root explained that he had severed the flow of mana. The golem wasn't getting back up this time. Around him, notifications flashed: subjugation guide targeting the golem, magic circuit guide analyzing mana flow and cutting the connection. Floria's smile vanished completely. Her irritation turned into open rage. Root told her again that she was the one forgetting. They didn't have time for her nonsense. Floria screamed at him to shut up. The ground suddenly split apart and a massive hand erupted upward. Another golem emerged far larger than the last. The shadow alone swallowed the area. Even Root and Lillian were stunned by its size. Floria laughed hysterically and said she would have her adorable golems grind them into paste. This one had a monstrous, almost dinosaur-like shape, huge, brutal, and terrifying. As it stepped forward, the ground shattered where Root and Lillian had been standing, forcing them to retreat. Lillian asked desperately if he could disable this one like before. Root shook his head, something that big was beyond him alone. He told her he needed her help. Then he shouted for her to unleash her magic, to hit it with the most powerful spell she had. Lillian answered right away, forcing herself to move as the massive golem prepared another attack. Through the cracks in its body, she caught sight of someone inside, a knight. It was the same one who had fought the golem earlier. The realization made Root's blood boil. He muttered that Floria really had terrible taste. Lillian blinked in confusion, but Floria only smiled wider, clearly convinced she had already won. She mocked him, saying his words were ironic. In her eyes, they were the cruel ones. She considered herself merciful, being reborn as one of her golems given a new purpose. She claimed there was no greater happiness than that. Lillian finally understood. This was exactly what Floria had talked about before, using humans as golem material. The experiment had succeeded. Root didn't waste time. He told Lillian he would get the person out of the golem, and once he did, she had to finish it off. Lillian panicked, saying she couldn't cast something that powerful on her own. Root was already moving, dodging heavy blows as he answered her. She had already unlocked her power twice before. All she had to do was remember that feeling. She could do it by herself now. Even though she was shaking, Root trusted her completely. He fought head-on using his shadow alongside him. The shadow tore through the golem's limbs, slicing off hands, but Floria only laughed, fascinated. She said that ability was perfect for testing the golem's durability. The monster kept attacking with its remaining limbs. The shadow battled relentlessly, creating openings. Root seized them, striking at weak points again and again until he finally broke open the golem's torso and pulled the knight free. He shouted for Lillian to do it now, but Lillian froze. Tears streamed down her face as she said she couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, the power wouldn't come. At that moment, the golem's exposed belly writhed as countless hands reached out trying to drag the knight back inside. Root yelled at her to feel her mana, to remember how it had flowed before. Floria laughed cruelly, saying there was no way trash like her could do anything. Root shouted back that Lillian wielded the power of a great archmage. Those words finally reached her. Lillian whispered that she could do this. She tried to believe it, but Floria cut in again, telling trash to know its place and stay quiet. That was when something inside Lillian snapped. She remembered the words she had just heard earlier. She wasn't trash. She screamed it out loud. She was not trash. Mana surged violently around her. Flames erupted as she began chanting, calling on the blaze of the heavens and the flame of the earth, weaving crimson fire and raging winds into a single spell. Root watched in awe and told her she had it. She truly was a great archmage. For the first time, Floria's smile vanished. Irritation and disbelief crossed her face as she questioned the sheer power gathering there. Lillian finished the chant and released it. She ordered everything to burn, to scorch the land and turn it all to ash. Flame breath and overwhelming torrent of fire exploded outward, completely engulfing the golem. The blast shook the ground, leaving nothing behind. When it was over, Lillian stood there, exhausted but upright. Through heavy breaths, she said she would never let anyone call her trash again. Floria stood there watching everything unfold, her face twisting with frustration. She could no longer hide her rage. She demanded to know what all of this was supposed to be. Root calmly explained that this was Lillian's true power. Her body had likely been suppressing it unconsciously, trying to keep the overwhelming strength she was born with from spiraling out of control. Floria snapped, telling him to shut up and stop talking like he understood anything. She insisted she was Lillian's older sister, and if she said Lillian was trash, then that was exactly what she was. She kept repeating it over and over, spiraling into an ugly rant that barely resembled reason. Lillian stepped forward and called her sister's name. She asked her to stop. She said she wasn't a doll, that she was there by her own choice. And if Floria stood in her way, she wouldn't hold back anymore, not even against her own sister. For a moment, Floria fell silent. Then she sighed and apologized, saying she had lost her temper. As an older sister, she said, she should have been happy to see Lillian grow so much. She smiled warmly and said she was proud of her. Lillian relaxed slightly and called her sister again. That smile twisted instantly. Floria revealed her true intent, declaring that she would tear Lillian apart and remake her into her strongest golem. A new golem formed from her hand as she lunged forward to attack, but something blocked her path. Root had stepped in between them. He told Lillian they were taking Floria down. Lillian answered without hesitation. Floria stared at them in disbelief and burst out laughing, asking if they seriously thought they could defeat her just because they destroyed a few golems. She warned them not to get arrogant. She attacked again, massive hands slashing wildly. Root managed to shield Lillian and shouted for her to attack. Lillian fired a barrage of fireballs that slammed into Floria. For a moment, Lillian smiled, thinking she had landed a hit. Floria stood unharmed. She mocked Lillian, asking if she really thought an attack like that could even scratch her. Lillian's confidence wavered, admitting it hadn't worked. Root told her that was fine. It wasn't meant to. While Floria focused on the flames, the shadow slipped behind her. Floria sensed something was wrong at the last moment and barely managed to dodge as the strike came in, her expression finally showing real alarm. Floria scoffed, calling it a cheap shot and mocking any idea of gentlemanly behavior. The dark shadow lingered and began wrapping around her body. She demanded to know what it was as it swallowed her up. Even while trapped inside, she kept struggling, yelling that she didn't understand what was happening. Each time she tried to break free, the shadow closed in again, tightening its grip. Then she realized something and grew even angrier. Root had run. She cursed repeatedly, shouting for him to come out. For the moment, though, both Root and Lillian stayed hidden. Lillian whispered that hiding was pointless, and that it was only a matter of time before Floria found them. Root calmly told her it was fine. He said this was exactly what he needed, just a little more time to prepare. Floria began leaping across rooftops, tearing through the area as she searched. She shouted that they couldn't have gone far and insulted them for relying on sneak attacks before running away. She sneered at Lillian, mocking her taste in men, threatening to gouge out her eyes and make sure she never talked back again. In her rant, she declared that a golem didn't need free will and that Lillian would become her toy. That was when an arrow suddenly pierced her. She froze in shock, letting out a confused sound. Then more arrows came flying in, striking her from multiple directions. Lillian tensed, worried, but Root reassured her. It was the Royal Capital Knight Order. They had come to rescue the knight taken earlier. A formation of knights appeared, and their leader announced that they had confirmed a hit on the Witch of Creation. Floria snapped the arrows out of her body, demanding to know who these people were. One of the knights began chanting, enchanting their weapons with the Flame Emperor's power. The entire unit surged with strength and unleashed another barrage. Arrows and fire rained down on Floria from all sides as the leader ordered them to keep firing. Then another enchantment followed, Thunder Emperor. Lightning crackled as the leader charged in with a thunder-infused sword, shouting as he attacked. Floria screamed in fury, calling them mere humans and demanding to know how they dared. Hidden nearby, Root watched calmly. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. In front of his eyes, a notification confirmed it all. Subjugation guide targeting Floria. The royal army was approaching to rescue the captured knight. The objective was clear: create a diversion, remain hidden, and lure Floria to higher ground where the royal army could ambush her properly. This was exactly the situation Root had been waiting for. The leader of the Royal Capital Knight Order charged forward, thunder roaring around his blade while Floria screeched in rage and lunged at him with her distorted, clawed limbs. The two collided head-on, the impact shaking the entire area. Floria clicked her tongue in irritation, muttering that this was getting unbearably annoying. In the next instant, her body was cleaved cleanly in two by the thunder sword. For a brief moment, it looked like it was over, but then dark magic surged, and the two halves began pulling themselves back together. Another strike followed immediately. At the same time, a barrage of arrows rained down, forcing her regeneration to stall. One of the knights shouted in disbelief, realizing what had just happened. That thing they were fighting wasn't even the Witch of Creation's real body. Someone muttered under their breath what everyone was thinking. What a monster! Threads peeled away from Floria's shattered body, and the knights finally understood what they had been fighting. One of them said it outright. That thing hadn't been the Witch of Creation herself, just one of her golems. Still, for something like that to attack a human village was unbelievable. The knights began talking among themselves. Reports had been coming in non-stop from nearby towns. Damage caused not only by the Witch of Creation, but even sightings tied to the Storm Witch. Something was clearly wrong. Their leader said that while the witches of the World Tree were infamous for their bad tempers and difficult personalities, they never attacked humans without reason. Normally, they only acted when someone got too close to the World Tree, and the World Tree they added was filled with countless rare resources, things that could greatly benefit mankind. Over the years, many adventurers had tried to claim them. Everyone had heard the stories. Another knight mentioned herbs with miraculous effects, some even rumored to cure any disease if prepared correctly. But those rumors always ended the same way. The World Tree was protected by the witches, and any adventurer who dared to trespass never came back alive. There was an old saying passed down locally. View the World Tree from afar, and the terror will remain asleep. Their mothers had taught them that as the knight spoke, Lillian quietly shared her side of the story with Root. She explained that their mother had strictly forbidden them from descending into human villages. That was why Floria being here made no sense. Root agreed something had to be wrong at the World Tree itself. Nearby, one of the knights mentioned that they had recently lost contact with Elsa, who had gone to investigate the situation. He feared the man had been captured by the witches. Another knight said there was no longer any point in hesitation. They would subjugate the witches of the wild. They couldn't allow any more harm to come to the villages. That was when Root finally spoke up. He hesitantly got their attention and gestured to the man beside him, the knight who had been trapped inside the golem. He asked if this was the Elsa they were talking about. The knights reacted instantly, rushing over to heal him. Before long, the man stirred, then slowly sat up. When asked if he was all right, he said he was fine and thanked them. He apologized and explained that the Witch of Creation had captured him. One of the knights nodded, saying they had already been told. Then he turned to Root and Lillian, saying he vaguely remembered seeing them before and thanking them as well. He introduced himself as Elsa. Root introduced himself in return, and Lillian followed. With that, all the pieces finally began to come together. Elsa spoke up and addressed the captain, saying that while he had been held captive, he had seen what the witches were doing. As he began recounting it, the scene shifted to his memories. He remembered Elvira noticing him and asking who the girl was. Floria had been there as well, busy preparing more golems, and casually replied that she had found the girl in a nearby village. She pointed out the armor and immediately realized it belonged to the Royal Army's investigation team. The moment the Royal Army was mentioned, Floria's interest sharpened. Elvira scoffed and said Floria was clueless about anything that wasn't related to golems. She explained that the Royal Army represented the heart of the human world, foolish, arrogant, and endlessly troublesome. Their armor symbolized that pride. She was certain of one thing: those people would eventually attack them. Floria laughed it off and said that if humans were coming, she would simply turn every last one of them into golem toys. Elvira, however, warned her not to underestimate the Royal Army. They were far more troublesome than Floria seemed to think. Elvira then turned toward their mother and asked what they should do. Their mother only let out a weak groan. Elvira smirked and remarked that groaning wasn't exactly helpful if they were trying to understand her thoughts. Their mother was deeply connected to the world tree, barely conscious. Floria spoke next, saying their mother had already reached her limit. From the outside, the world tree still looked fine, but on the inside, it was beginning to rot. Hearing that, Elvira casually suggested they abandon the rotting tree altogether and go live in the capital instead. Floria immediately reminded her of the promise they had made to their mother. Elvira repeated it mockingly, that they were never to leave the world tree, that attacking humans would only lead to conflict, and that conflict would become the spark that burned their roots to the ground. Floria affirmed it. Their mission was to continue watching over the world tree that had taken root in this land. Elvira snapped back, asking if that meant they could never leave this place. Floria answered firmly that it did. Elvira shouted that she would rather die than live like that. In a sudden burst of anger, Floria slammed her fist into the world tree itself. Elvira stared at her in surprise, calling her name. Floria's eyes were burning as she spoke. Their mission was to guard the world tree and avoid unnecessary conflict, but that only mattered as long as the tree was healthy. If it was rotting anyway, then there was no reason to hold back. She proposed killing everyone in the capital and taking it as their new vessel. They could plant new roots there. Elvira's expression twisted into a grin. Now that, she said, was an idea she liked. Elsa had heard all of this. Panic filled him as he realized how dangerous the situation truly was. He needed to warn the others immediately, but his body wouldn't move. Elvira said that the fact an investigation team had shown up meant the Royal Army was already moving. Their first step, she decided, would be to wipe them out. Floria agreed, adding that they would need far more golems for that, which meant harvesting humans with magical talent. Elvira sounded almost excited as she told her sister to get to work. Then she casually added that she had forgotten something important. They should also finish off that girl. As Floria rode atop a golem and began preparing for the attack, Elsa could only repeat one thought in his mind. He had to warn them. Back in the present, finished his report. The knight captain's expression hardened when she heard the words, "Kill everyone in the capital." Root quietly added that the world tree itself was rotting. That made the situation even clearer. The captain said there was no time to lose. They would launch a surprise attack before the witches could complete their preparations. If Verdun had truly lost her power, this might be their only chance. Root hesitated, then asked if they could come along as well. He was sure they could help. The knights exchanged glances, but Elsa spoke up and agreed. The captain nodded and said they would be glad to have them, shaking Root's hand to seal it. With the alliance formed, everyone looked once more toward the distant world tree. Root thought to himself that if the world tree withered completely, saving Rona would become impossible. Still, there had to be another way. Lillian stepped closer and asked if he was holding up all right. Root answered that they would accompany the knights for now. Their top priority was meeting Verdant. The knight captain agreed and ordered everyone to move immediately, setting a direct course for the World Tree before the witches had time to prepare. Lillian pointed out that no matter how fast they moved, it would still take at least half a day to reach it. Shouldn't they rest at a village first? The captain said there was no need. Then she activated a spell, chanting an enchantment of the Thunder Emperor. Lightning surged through the group. Root and Lillian were both stunned by the sensation. Root asked what she had done. The captain explained that she had imbued them with lightning magic to amplify their physical abilities. With this, they could move at twice the speed of a horse. Lillian was amazed, saying this was the power of lightning magic, a support spell that strengthened allies. Root immediately realized how valuable that would be. The captain didn't slow down. She said they didn't have much time and told them to explain everything else along the way as they moved. They sprinted through the forest at full speed, lightning still crackling faintly around their bodies. While running, Root explained that they had been exiled from their homeland and were now wandering without anywhere to truly belong. The captain responded that such a betrayal was cruel, calling it a terrible tragedy. Root added that they had left as soon as they heard about the destruction caused by the World Tree Witches. The captain thanked them again for saving Elsa. Root simply replied that they had done what needed to be done. Lillian stayed quiet, keeping her thoughts to herself. This arrangement worked in her favor. There was no way she could tell them that their real goal was to meet Verdant, and this cover story was believable enough to get them through. Elsa then asked how the two of them knew each other. Lillian hesitated for a split second before saying they were just traveling together. Elsa apologized for the strange question, but said there was something about her that reminded him of the witches that made Lillian tense. She laughed it off nervously and said he must be mistaken. Before the conversation could continue, Root suddenly shouted a warning. Something massive descended from above. A huge flying creature, part dragon, part construct, blocked their path. One of the knights gasped, wondering if it was a dragon. The captain immediately identified it as a weapon deployed by the witches and ordered everyone to prepare for battle. The creature opened its mouth, gathering energy for a breath attack. The captain shouted commands, ordering the archers to knock their arrows and chanting an enchantment of the Ice Emperor. A volley of ice-enchanted arrows shot forward, colliding head-on with the dragon's flames in midair. Fire and ice exploded together, and the frozen arrows continued onward. Lillian thought it was a direct hit. Root said it wasn't. The dragon crashed down right in front of them and immediately unleashed a close-range blast. One of the knights saw an opening and charged, shouting that he would take its head clean off. Root yelled for him to stop, but it was too late. The dragon moved faster than expected, striking the knight midair and sending him flying back toward Elsa. The knight apologized through gritted teeth, admitting it had been careless. The captain ordered Elsa to hold the front line while she searched for the creature's weak point to finish it. Lillian said she and Root would support them. Root shook his head. That wasn't going to be an option. As the smoke cleared, they noticed something disturbing. A massive hand was embedded within the dragon's body, as if it were being controlled from inside. Root narrowed his eyes and muttered that the main attraction had finally decided to show itself. Floria emerged from the dragon's gaping mouth, smiling brightly as if this were all a game. She called out to Lillian, amused, saying that Lillian really was a persistent nuisance. Lillian stiffened and whispered her sister's name. Root glanced at the situation and suggested that retreating might be wiser for now, but then corrected himself. He told Lillian that he was in command here and ordered her to deal with the dragon. Lillian hesitated, knowing what that meant, but Root was already thinking ahead. Their true objective wasn't the dragon at all. It was the Witch of Soulcraft herself. Captain Ceres was watching the battlefield carefully. Seeing their intent, she activated another enchantment, calling upon the Thunder Emperor and imbuing both Root and Lillian with even greater speed and power. Floria scoffed, warning them not to get cocky just because they had destroyed one of her golems. She began hurling attacks at them in rapid succession. Thanks to the lightning enhancement, Root and Lillian narrowly avoided each strike, moving faster than the eye could follow. Floria grew more irritated, but at the same time she looked delighted. She declared that she wouldn't even bother turning them into golems anymore. She would tear them apart right there. As she began preparing another spell, Root told Lillian to take them upward. She responded instantly. Shadows surged beneath them, lifting them into the air. Floria blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting that. Root and Lillian used the opening to reposition and prepare their next move. Floria snarled, accusing them of trying to run away again and mocking her. She refused to let them keep escaping and immediately gave chase, her excitement growing as she pursued them relentlessly. While they ran, Root muttered that he would rather not reveal all his abilities in front of Ceres and the other knights. They needed to put some distance between themselves and the others first. Floria stayed close behind, clearly enjoying the hunt, closing the gap little by little. At last, Root decided they had gone far enough. He stopped and turned around, saying the spot would do. As he planted his feet, the shadow beneath him erupted forward, surging straight at Floria's face. She shattered it instantly, scoffing at how weak an attack like that was. Still, her irritation was obvious. She snapped that constantly running away and launching sneak attacks made him unbelievably annoying, like some pest that wouldn't die. Root calmly answered that he had his reasons. Then his tone shifted. From this moment on, he said he was done holding back. He would come at her with everything he had and prove that he was the real GOAT, the greatest of all time. Floria looked genuinely amused. She asked if he was seriously telling her to prepare herself, as if he had forgotten who he was speaking to. As her anger rose, her body began to swell, growing larger and more imposing by the second. She scoffed that a tiger didn't need resolve to fight a rat. Root immediately called out to Lillian. She answered that she understood. Floria mocked them, asking if they were really trying to strategize right in front of her, warning that she wasn't kind enough to allow that. The moment she moved to strike, both of them slipped out of range. Root clicked his tongue in irritation. Floria narrowed her eyes and remarked that he had some strange tricks up his sleeve. Root shot back that she seemed overly focused on him and reminded her that Lillian was there too. Floria dismissed it instantly. When it came to Lillian, she claimed she knew her better than anyone. That piece of trash, she said, couldn't accomplish anything on her own. After she finished tearing Root apart, she would dote on Lily properly. She rushed him with full force. Root barely managed to block her punch with his sword, panic flickering across his face as the impact rattled his entire body. But while Floria's attention was completely locked onto him, Lillian was quietly gathering magic behind them. She told herself that she could fight too. Root continued to keep Floria occupied, pushing himself to his limits. Then a massive fireball slammed into Floria's back, far stronger than before. Root felt it instantly. This was it. He shouted and lunged forward, striking with everything he had. Floria caught his sword with her bare hand. Smiling, she asked if he really thought that was his chance. Wasn't Lillian supposed to be his trump card? Panic finally surfaced on Root's face. In the next instant, Floria punched him hard enough to send him flying. She turned her attention to Lillian, smiling gently. She said she had witnessed Lillian's sudden spike in magical power during the last battle, but fire element attacks were useless against her. She explained her ability, Flender Flame Nullification, an absolute creation skill that completely nullified all fire attribute attacks. Lillian froze, unable to believe it. Even as Root struggled back to his feet, he muttered the name of the ability under his breath, understanding what it meant. Floria calmly explained that fire was the natural enemy of the World Tree. After centuries of contending with it, she had perfected an absolute defense. Root stood again, shadows gathering at his side, and launched another strike with his shadow. At the same time, Lillian refused to give up. She pushed herself once more, chanting through gritted teeth, calling upon the blazing fires of heaven and the scorching flames of the earth, weaving crimson flame, raging winds, and furious heat into a single desperate spell. Floria kept her attention locked on Rout. When the shadow lunged in, she caught it mid-attack and sneered, saying it looked like some kind of golem, one made of shadow instead of clay or stone. Behind them, Lillian finally finished gathering her magic and unleashed it, crying out as she released flame breath. The torrent of fire was even stronger than before, roaring across the battlefield, but Floria didn't even flinch. She dismissed it as futile. Root stood back up alongside his shadow and struck again, refusing to give her breathing room. Lillian, exhausted but stubborn, forced herself to chant once more, calling on blazing heavens, scorching earth, crimson flames, raging winds, pouring everything she had left into the spell. Once again, Floria ignored the fire and seized the shadow as it came at her, mocking it as a toy. Lillian released another flame breath stronger still, but Floria only laughed. She declared that it was pointless. Her flame nullification erased any and all fire. And Lily, she added cruelly, was only capable of fire magic. So what other move did they have left? Root said nothing. That silence made Floria even more smug. She laughed loudly, drunk on her sense of superiority. Lillian, completely drained, swayed on her feet. Then through ragged breaths, she began chanting something different. A violent explosion erupted from that mouth. Root's eyes widened in genuine fear. Floria laughed wildly, delighted by the expression on his face. And then the sky answered. A colossal thunderbolt tore down from above, striking Floria dead on. It was like the lightning of legends. Zeus striking Typhon, Thor crashing down on Jormungandr, Indra's thunder slaying Vitra. The air split apart as lightning engulfed her entire body. Floria froze in shock. Lightning magic? How was that even possible? The lightning was simply too much. Floria's body locked up, muscles refusing to respond as the residual thunder still crackled around her. She couldn't even lift a finger. Lillian, meanwhile, was completely spent, barely able to stay on her feet, but that was enough. That single moment was the opening Rout had been waiting for all along. He stepped in close and told Floria calmly that the reason she lost was simple. She had underestimated Lillian far too much. As he spoke, he activated another function of his ability. A notification appeared explaining mana severance, an ability that read the target's mana flow and forcibly cut it off, stripping them of all power. The moment it took effect, Floria's strength vanished. Her body went limp and she collapsed. Root caught her before she hit the ground. More notifications followed, laying out the truth of the battle. By repeatedly casting fire spells, Lillian had been made to look harmless, lulling Floria into lowering her guard. With the lightning enhancement provided earlier, Lillian had been able to channel all her remaining mana into a single lightning spell. Using the opening that created and with guidance from Root's mana circuit analysis, Root had severed Floria's mana flow and neutralized her completely. It had all been planned from the start. Root turned to Lillian and asked if she was all right, still holding Floria in his arms. Lillian nodded weakly and said she was somehow. Then she hesitated and asked about Floria. Root reassured her. He said it was fine. He hadn't killed her. Floria was still alive because she was going to be the key to opening the path to the World Tree. Nearby, the knights were still locked in a desperate struggle with the dragon. They kept chanting in chant. Ice Emperor, volley after volley flying through the air, only for the dragon to counter each time with scorching fire breath. The clash of ice and flame filled the battlefield. Elsa refused to fall back. Again and again he pushed forward, and this time he managed to land a clean ice-infused strike. Frost spread across the dragon's face, and the knights followed up instantly with a fire arrow. A massive explosion swallowed the dragon in smoke. For a moment hope flickered. Someone asked if they had finally done it. The captain immediately denied it. The smoke cleared, and the dragon rose again. Disbelief spread through the ranks. One knight muttered that it was impossible. The dragon roared and retaliated, smashing Elsa aside and sending him flying straight back toward Captain Ceres. It began gathering mana once more, preparing an even larger flame attack. The knights were clearly reaching their limit. Still, Elsa shouted for them not to give up and ordered them to form a defensive wall. Ceres stepped forward, telling everyone to get behind her as she raised her barrier. Even as the fire pressed in, she steeled herself, thinking that even if they fell here, reinforcements from the capital would avenge them. The dragon's mana surged, condensing into a massive fireball. This was it. Then something changed. The dragon suddenly froze mid-motion. His attack fizzled out. Confusion rippled through the battlefield. The knights stared as abruptly turned around and fled. Someone shouted that it was retreating. Others cheered, convinced their attacks had finally worked. But Ceres didn't cheer. She didn't understand what had just happened. Elsewhere, Root was standing extremely close to Floria, supporting her weakened body. He muttered that he had made it just in time. Lillian asked what he was doing, clearly alarmed. Root told her not to worry and said he would explain. Then he looked up. The dragon was flying straight toward them. Lillian panicked, but Root calmly explained that he had manipulated Floria's mana flow and seized control of the dragon golem. When she asked what he meant by seizing control, the answer became obvious. The dragon descended in front of them. Moments later, Root, Lillian, and the incapacitated Floria were riding on its back. As the wind roared past them, Lillian could barely believe what was happening and asked how he had even managed this. Root didn't go into detail. He simply stretched his hand forward and told her they were heading straight for the World Tree. Root and Lillian rode atop the dragon as it cut through the sky. Root said that with the dragon, they would reach the World Tree long before Captain Sirius and the others. They needed to be the first to arrive. Lillian glanced back uneasily and asked what would happen when Floria woke up. Root told her not to worry. Floria wouldn't regain consciousness for at least half a day, and besides, he had complete control over the dragon now. Hearing that, Lillian relaxed a little and said she understood. Root soon said they were getting close. Not long after, the colossal World Tree finally filled their vision. The moment Lillian saw it up close, her face drained of color. She whispered her mother's name, fear creeping into her voice. Something was clearly wrong. Root felt the same unease. Just as he had suspected, something was terribly off. Then a sudden surge of power rippled through the air. Root asked what that violent wind was. Lillian's eyes widened as she realized it could only mean one thing. Before either of them could react, the force slammed into them. Lillian was torn off the dragon's back. Root shouted her name and reached out desperately, barely managing to grab her. He asked if she was all right, but in that instant, he noticed something else. Floria was gone. A calm, chilling voice echoed through the air, asking what the meaning of all this was. Elvira appeared holding Floria with ease. Root and Elvira finally stood face to face. Elvira looked down at him coldly and told him to leave. This was not a playground where he could simply wander in. Lillian immediately recognized who it was. Her face stiffened as she called out to Elvira, addressing her as her elder sister. She hurriedly explained that they hadn't come to threaten anyone. They only wanted to talk to their mother. Root followed up calmly, addressing Elvira as the Witch of the Storm and saying they had no intention of harming her. He asked her to at least listen. Elvira laughed coldly. She said no one would believe that, especially when Floria had been hurt by them. Lillian tried to deny it, but Elvira didn't give her the chance. The killing intent was already there. Root sighed inwardly, realizing that talking really was pointless. Elvira raised her hand and invoked the Thunder Emperor. The sky answered instantly. Violent lightning crashed down onto the dragon they were riding. Lillian was shocked that the dragon endured it. She realized the creature had been infused with Elvira's own magic and possessed incredible durability. Elvira, on the other hand, was furious. She demanded to know who had given them permission to use that child. Floria sneered weakly, saying she would deal with Elvira later for letting her golem get stolen. Then she dismissed the matter, saying Elvira was in the way anyway, and that she could rest inside the World Tree for now. With that, Floria was sent away, leaving Elvira to focus fully on the fight. Root said quietly that they would have to take Elvira down. The dragon surged forward, charging straight at her. Elvira prepared another spell and condensed a crimson flame into a spear. She hurled it at the dragon's head, snarling that defying one's creator was the height of foolishness. The attack struck hard, badly injuring the dragon. Elvira mocked them, asking if they really thought they could defeat her with her own creation. But then the dragon's tail slammed into her with tremendous force. Root remarked coolly that it was unfortunate for her. He had taken the liberty of making a few modifications. A notification flashed explaining that by manipulating the magic circuit of the dragon golem, its strength had been further enhanced. Lillian stared in disbelief. The dragon had actually wounded her elder sister. For a brief moment, she thought they might really be able to win. Root immediately warned her not to get her hopes up and told her to listen carefully. Elvira roared in rage. She shouted that no one, not even their mother, had ever managed to wound her. Lightning exploded across her body as she gathered immense power in her hands. The dragon answered with a massive fireball, blasting it straight at her. Elvira caught the flames with her bare hand, crushed them, and flung them aside as if they were nothing. Then she raised her hand again, thunder screaming through the air, and declared that they would return to dust. Elvira continued to gather power, lightning compressing and screaming in her grasp. When it reached its peak, she hurled it forward. The thunder tore straight through the dragon, obliterating it in a single strike. Root and Lillian were thrown from the sky and slammed into the ground below. As they struggled back to their feet, Elvira looked down at them and said coldly that their toy was gone now. She asked if they were prepared. Root steadied himself and acknowledged her strength, calling her worthy of the title Witch of the Storm. At the same time, lightning began raging around Elvira again as she prepared an even larger attack. Root didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lillian and they ran. Elvira clicked her tongue, mocking them for scurrying away like rats. Thunder chased them from behind, carving craters into the earth. As they ran, Root spoke calmly, saying he could read her attacks like an open book. Even with all that magical power, he said, it was nothing more than treasure she didn't know how to properly use. A notification flickered in front of him confirming it, an attack path guide that revealed the trajectory of her strikes and the optimal way to evade them. Elvira shouted in fury at his insolence. Root kept provoking her, taunting that she looked impressive soaring in the sky yet couldn't land a single hit on him. Her frustration boiled over. She wondered if this was just a cheap taunt, if he thought he stood a chance by luring her closer. In the end, she decided to indulge him. She condensed an enormous thunderbolt in her hand and declared that she would play along with his game. Whatever his plan was, she said, there was no way he could block this. Then she charged straight at him, lightning roaring, promising to make him regret it even in the afterlife. This wasn't the borrowed thunder they had used against Floria. This was the true power of the Witch of the Storm, the thunder of a being who stood closer to a god than any human ever could. Root didn't flinch. He said her arrogance would be her downfall. Shadows erupted around him, spreading outward and swallowing the battlefield. As Elvira closed in, she finally realized what she was seeing. Shadow. He possessed the ability of a shadow user. It didn't matter, she shouted. Thunder answered her call once more as she invoked the Thunder Emperor's Phoenix. But another bolt descended from the sky. This lightning wasn't hers. It crashed straight into Elvira, smashing her down into the ground. Even as she lay there, scorched and furious, she snarled that anyone who opposed her would be erased without leaving behind even a speck of dust. As Elvira lay there, she suddenly became aware of her surroundings again. Her gaze drifted toward the World Tree and then to their mother. She spoke bitterly, saying that if their mother hadn't opposed her, none of this would have happened. Being trapped in a place like this was unbearable to her. She declared that she was leaving the World Tree behind. After all, she claimed the World Tree itself was waiting for her. That was when a voice came from behind her. Root apologized calmly for the sneak attack, explaining that if it meant saving Rona, he couldn't afford to be picky about his methods. Elvira started to turn at once, but she was too late. A massive shock slammed straight into her chest, then into her abdomen, stealing the breath from her lungs. Root held his position, bracing himself and pouring everything into the attack, making sure it didn't fail this time. The blow was heavy enough that even Elvira collapsed to the ground, her body no longer responding. Lillian let out a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding and said that it seemed to have worked. Root, however, immediately told her to listen carefully. Against her sister, a direct confrontation would never work. The only way to win was to catch Elvira off guard and neutralize her completely. Lillian instinctively protested, catching her elder sister impossible. Root cut her off and told her to use the magic stone they had obtained from the shadowless spider. Lillian immediately understood that stone could conceal one's presence. Root explained the plan calmly. She would dodge Elvira's attacks, slip behind her, and when he gave the signal, she would use magic to move at high speed and evade the counterattack. For that, he needed her power. Lillian hesitated, pointing out that Root could replicate any magic he had experienced before. Root reminded her that she had already done it herself, just like when she had reproduced lightning magic. Realization dawned on her. It was Ceres support magic. Root asked her if she could do it just like back when they were on the dragon. Lillian answered that she understood. And now in the present it had worked exactly as planned. Root told her he had believed she could pull it off. Lillian smiled, relief and pride mixing together. After that, Root silently lifted Elvira and began carrying her toward the World Tree. Lillian called out to him once, but he didn't answer. He simply kept walking. After a while, he finally spoke and said they should go see Wardina. Lillian agreed and followed him. When they reached the World Tree, Lillian placed her hand against its bark and quietly greeted it, calling it an old tree. In response, a hidden door slowly opened. The two of them stepped inside. Within, Lillian called out to her mother again and again. Wardina looked weak, her voice faint, but slowly her eyes opened. She murmured Lillian's name in disbelief. Her gaze then shifted, noticing that both Floria and Elvira were unconscious. She said calmly that Lillian had grown strong. Lillian and her mother shared a quiet emotional moment, one filled with things that didn't need words. Then Root stepped forward. He addressed Wardina as the Witch of Regeneration and said he wished to rely on her power, the power that wove life itself and breathed vitality into the earth. He asked her to save his sister, Rona, whose soul resided within him. Wardina observed Lillian again and remarked that she had changed greatly, adding that it seemed to be thanks to Root. Lillian immediately spoke up, calling Wardina her mother and asking her to lend them her power. Wardina reached out and placed her hand toward Lillian. She asked softly if Lillian truly didn't resent her even after being abandoned. Lillian met her gaze without wavering and said she didn't resent her at all. After all, her mother had told them the truth 14 years ago. Wardina stood before her 3 daughters who listened in rare, uneasy silence. She told them that their role had always been the same, to protect the world tree, to guard it from outsiders, and to watch over its growth. Elvira immediately protested, saying she didn't want to stay trapped in a place like this forever and that she wanted to see the outside world. Floria, more curious than rebellious, asked what the world tree actually was. Lillian, meanwhile, said nothing. She simply observed her sisters quietly taking in their reactions. Their mother began to explain. Long ago, this land had been nothing but a barren wasteland where no life could survive. It was the witches of the past who poured their magic into the earth, restoring it and allowing life to take root. Lillian then asked what would happen if the world tree were to wither. Wardina answered calmly that the tree died, the flow of magic in the region would cease, and the land would return to the lifeless wasteland it once was. Elvira reacted sharply, saying that if protecting the world tree meant protecting the land, then it made no sense for humans to try to burn it. As those words left her mouth, memories of the chaos and fear she had seen surfaced in her mind. At that moment, a root rose from beneath her feet, lifting her gently into the air toward their mother. Startled, Elvira asked what was happening. Wardina replied that one day, she would understand that everything in this world circulated, intersected, and flowed as one. More roots emerged, lifting Lillian and Floria as well, bringing all 3 sisters together before her. Wardina wrapped them in her arms, her voice soft as she told them that she loved them. The sisters, despite everything, found comfort in that embrace. Back in the present, Lillian explained that those words had been sincere. Only now did she truly understand that protecting the world tree also meant protecting countless people. Wardina smiled gently when she saw that realization reflected in Lillian's eyes. Lillian then asked what power she had ever possessed that would have allowed her to remain at the world tree back then. Wardina answered honestly, saying that none of them could leave the world tree. If Lillian had stayed by now, she likely would have. She didn't finish the sentence. Lillian nodded and said she understood. Back then, her mother had had no choice but to drive her away coldly. Wardina didn't deny it. She then turned to Root and thanked him for helping Lillian grow, saying she would cooperate with him. Root immediately brought up his sister, but Wardina interrupted, apologizing as she said that it was impossible. Even Lillian was caught off guard by that answer. Root could already see it coming. To him, it was obvious that the problem lay in the weakening of the world tree's essence. At this point, the tree had lost most of its power. Lillian panicked when she heard that and asked how such a thing was even possible. Before anyone could answer, Elvira burst into manic laughter. If the world tree really died and the land returned to a wasteland, she said, then none of it mattered anyway. Wardina sharply called her name, but Elvira ignored her. She insisted it was all a lie meant to bind them to the world tree, claiming she already knew the truth. Then everyone felt it: movement, heat, violence. Lillian turned pale as she saw flames rising outside. The world tree was under attack. Knights were advancing, shouting that the world tree monsters should come out if they didn't want to be burned along with it. Elvira snapped completely. She raged that she would slaughter them all, but Root cut in, telling her that this was exactly why the knights were attacking in the first place, because Elvira had assaulted the surrounding towns. Even if she crushed them here, he said, the cycle of revenge would never end. Elvira scoffed, calling the knights trash and declaring that if it came down to it, she didn't mind throwing this place away altogether. Even Wardina looked shaken by those words. Root pressed on, explaining that Elvira and her sisters were born from the world tree itself. Their mana flowed from it. If the world tree withered, their power would dry up as well. Elvira immediately rejected that, calling it another lie meant to deceive her. She claimed Wardina's words were nothing more than chains, but Root calmly told her that she was the one being deceived. He said he could read the flow of mana centered on the world tree, and if it died, so would her magic. For the first time, Elvira fell silent, then angrily denied it again. Lillian stepped forward, desperate, calling out for her sister to stop. Wardina spoke then, saying that Elvira's interference with the royal capital knights had already gone too far. Even if she wiped them out now, the land would suffer catastrophic consequences. At that moment, Root turned to Wardina and asked her to trust him. He said that if she left it to him, he would protect the World Tree no matter what. Wardina looked at him closely, meeting his gaze, and saw the resolve there. Outside the World Tree, Elsa was pacing back and forth, clearly frustrated. She reported that it was useless. There was no entrance anywhere. Ceres agreed. It was obvious the witches were hiding inside the World Tree, but without a way in, they were stuck. After circling the trunk and placing her hand against the bark, Ceres finally muttered that there was no choice left. If they couldn't reach them, they would have to burn the tree itself. That was when a voice suddenly echoed from within. Ceres was told to wait. The knights froze in shock as Root stepped out from the World Tree. He told them to stop, explaining that the land received immense blessings from the World Tree and that burning it would be a grave mistake. Elsa stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know how he had even managed to get inside. Root calmly replied that the problem had already been resolved and that they should withdraw. Ceres immediately objected. If they didn't burn the World Tree now, she argued, the witches would surely attack nearby towns again, leading to countless casualties. Root repeated that there was no need for that anymore. He said he had already captured the witches. To prove it, he stepped aside. Bound and restrained, Elvira and Floria were brought out, followed by Wardina herself. The sight left the knights speechless. These were the terrifying witches who had thrown entire regions into chaos, and now they were all restrained. Even Ceres struggled to process what she was seeing. Root told the knights that he was handing the witches over to them, and that they could deal with them however they saw fit. Wardina then stepped forward and faced Ceres directly. Ceres asked if she truly was Wardina, the witch of the World Tree. Wardina remained silent at first. Ceres pressed on, demanding to know why they had attacked humans in the first place. Wardina finally answered. She explained that they were guardians of the World Tree, tasked with eliminating anything that threatened it. Without the World Tree's blessings, the land itself could not sustain life. If the tree withered, the land would die with it. Ceres fired back, asking why then they had attacked villages that were nowhere near the World Tree. Wardina's reply was cold and emotionless. Humans, she said, were pests that multiplied endlessly, and exterminating pests didn't require justification. Hearing that, Ceres snapped. Her anger flared instantly, and she struck. Elvira immediately snapped, demanding to know what Ceres thought she was doing. Floria panicked as well, calling out to their mother. Wardina, however, only laughed. Ceres' expression hardened. To her, that laughter confirmed everything. She coldly declared that Wardina was nothing more than a monster after all, and ordered the witches to be taken away. Then she turned to Root, clearly impressed. She admitted she hadn't expected him to capture all 3 witches so cleanly. Root brushed it off, saying it was simply that his skill happened to be a good match against them. Ceres grew curious and asked what kind of skill he possessed. From her point of view, once the witches were stripped of their magic, they were no longer something to fear. Powerless, they were no different from ordinary criminals. She then brought up Root's situation, noting that he was traveling because he had lost his hometown. With that in mind, she offered him a place among the royal knights, even promising to write a recommendation herself if he wished. Root laughed softly and declined. He said he appreciated the offer, but for now, he wanted to continue traveling the world together with Lillian. Lillian was visibly surprised by that, while Sirius simply smiled and told him that the offer would always stand. If he ever changed his mind, he was welcome to seek them out. With that, the knights departed. Once they were gone, Lillian let out a relieved breath and said that everything seemed to have worked out in the end. Root agreed. Nearby, Elvira and Floria were speaking among themselves. Floria admitted that she hadn't expected Root to see through her golem so easily just by exchanging blows with it. Root explained calmly that by manipulating the flow of magic, he had reconfigured the golem and sharpened its movements, making its nature obvious. Elvira gave a short laugh and admitted that he wasn't bad for a guide. Wardina then spoke up, acknowledging that thanks to Root's ability, he had managed to reach her. Root replied that they had simply gambled on a slim chance and pushed forward until it worked. That was when countless roots suddenly burst from the ground and wrapped around Root. Lillian cried out in shock, calling his name. The roots pulled Root toward Wardina. As she drew him close, her tone changed completely. She told him that with his ability, he already knew the true condition of the World Tree. Didn't he? Root answered honestly. He said the world tree was infested with monsters deep within its roots and was steadily losing its magic. Those creatures, he added, were dangerously unstable. Lillian was left speechless. Wardina's expression grew more serious than ever before. Staring straight at Root, she accused him of something unthinkable, saying that a guide like him was trying to destroy the world itself. Root met her gaze, his face just as serious. He neither denied it nor confirmed it. Lillian immediately stepped in, insisting that Root would never do something like that. Root himself followed up calmly, saying that no matter what, he intended to save the world tree. Wardina didn't deny his resolve. Instead, she explained the truth. The monsters nesting deep within the roots were siphoning off the world tree's magic, steadily accumulating terrifying power. Once that creature fully absorbed the world tree's essence and evolved, it wouldn't just threaten this land. It would become a danger to the entire world. That revelation visibly shook Elvira. Wardina continued, saying that, in their current state, burning the world tree would limit the damage to this region alone. She had already resigned herself to that fate, even if it meant allowing the royal army to destroy it. Root, however, had turned the army back despite knowing all this. Elvira couldn't accept it. She protested that she'd only heard about the monster weakening the world tree, not about it becoming a world-level threat. Wardina's gaze sharpened. She said it was exactly what she expected. Elvira had never truly listened. Elvira snapped back that all she'd ever wanted was to see the outside world. She spoke dreamily about what might lie beyond the sea. As a child, she had always wondered about it. Then a realization struck her. Lillian had left the world tree. If Lillian could do it, then maybe she could too. That thought became her hope. She remembered the feeling vividly, soaring freely through the sky, flying alongside birds, the wind wrapping around her. In that moment, she believed nothing could take her freedom away. Then pain erupted inside her. A vine burst forth, coiling around her body and yanking her down from the sky. As she plummeted, panic set in. Her magic slipped out of her control. She couldn't understand what was happening, only that something was binding her, crushing her freedom. That was when she heard the voice. Wardina's voice. Elvira was told that her role was to protect the world tree. She was forbidden from leaving. Her power was too great. If unleashed freely, it would harm humans and threaten the world tree itself. Elvira remembered shouting back in despair, asking if that meant she was to be imprisoned there for her entire life. She remembered being told coldly that this was their fate. After that, Wardina had returned to the world tree, leaving Elvira behind. Elvira had struck the trunk with her fists, crying, screaming, asking why they were even born in the first place, and then someone appeared behind her. That figure told her she shouldn't be locked away in a place like this. Startled and furious, Elvira had immediately grabbed the intruder and slammed him down, demanding to know who he was and why he'd taken her belongings. The man only replied calmly that if he truly meant her harm, he wouldn't have bothered speaking first. Elvira declared coldly that her role was to protect the world tree and that she would crush anyone she deemed suspicious. The stranger, instead of retreating, sounded almost impressed. He called it amazing. That was enough to trigger her killing intent. She moved to strike, but his next words stopped her mid-motion. He told her she was the one who should go outside. Elvira froze. The man spoke as if he already understood everything. He claimed she had been born to save the world, yet Wardina feared her power and locked her inside a narrow birdcage called the World Tree. Enraged, Elvira demanded to know who he was. He introduced himself as nothing more than a scout searching for a savior who could set the chaotic world right. According to him, the world beyond was overflowing with injustice where the weak were endlessly trampled. When Elvira questioned what he meant by the world, he revealed a monster and calmly said he would release her from this place. She was stunned. He reassured her that it would only weaken the world tree temporarily. If she allowed this child to be unleashed into the world, she would gain her freedom at last. Desperate to escape, Elvira accepted his words and his offer. At the time, she truly believed she had been freed. Now standing in the present, guilt gnawed at her. She realized too late what she had done. Wardina asked Root one final question. Did he intend to destroy the world? Root answered without hesitation that he did not. Wardina then made her request. If that was the case, he must burn the world tree before the monster within could fully evolve. Those born from the world tree could never destroy it with their own hands. She accepted that the root of everything lay with her and entrusted the decision to him. Root replied honestly, if the world tree withered, he would never be able to save Rona. Wardina acknowledged that even if he wished to save his sister, the world tree had already lost much of its power. Root didn't back down. He said he still needed Wardina's strength. Then he turned to the others, Elvira, Floria, and finally Lillian. Lillian answered quietly that she was ready. Root declared his plan. They would subjugate the monster nesting within the world tree itself. For that, he needed all of their power. Wardina said it was impossible. Even before evolving, the creature had already absorbed an enormous amount of magic and grown into a calamity. Root asked her to believe in his guidepost skill. At that moment, a notification appeared before him initiating subjugation guide for the dweller. Witch of regeneration, Wardina. Witch of the storm, Elvira. Witch of soul creation, Floria. Witch of the great vessel, Lillian. Please form a party with each witch. That was his answer. Root declared that he would save the world tree and prove once and for all that he could save Rona too. Now if you don't want to miss out the epic battle that's about to come, then subscribe now. Turn on all the notifications.
Alright, that's the end of the story. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.